In the summer of 2009, a 15-year-old girl looked at her cell phone and saw her older sister's name on the screen. Melissa had disappeared a week earlier and no one knew where she was. The girl answered quickly, hoping to hear her sister's voice, but it was a man who spoke. Monotone voice, Long Island accent, no emotion at all. He knew the girl's name, he knew what she looked like, and in the following minutes he described what he had done to Melissa. Details that a 15-year-old girl should never have heard. At the end of the call, he said he killed her sister and hung up. This man called 6 more times in the following weeks, always from Melissa's cell phone. Always from crowded places in Manhattan where the calls couldn't be traced, and always to the same girl. He didn't call the police, he didn't call the press. He called a teenager because he wasn't trying to take credit. He wanted to make someone suffer. And the worst part is, no one, absolutely no one, would find out who this man was for more than 13 years. I'm Marcos Campos, an architect from New York who killed 8 women over the course of 17 years. And no one ever suspected a thing. So how did an ordinary family man manage to hide a double life for so long? Why did it take the police more than a decade to get anywhere near the right suspect? And how did a piece of pizza crust succeed where years of investigation had failed? We'll explore that together today. Please leave a like, comment, even an emoji, and join as a member if possible. And now, let's get to the facts. To understand this case, we need to go back to the early morning of May 1st, 2010. A 24-year-old woman named Shannon Gilbert was working as an escort in Long Island, New York. Her driver, a guy named Michael Peck, had taken her to a gated community called Oak Beach to meet a client there. A guy named Joseph Brewer. Shannon had never been to Oak Beach before. She had never seen this guy, Brewer. She got there around 2 a.m. and went into his house. Peck waited outside in the car. The driver, right? For almost 3 hours, everything seemed normal. Then, around 4:50 in the morning, Shannon called emergency services, and what the operator heard was chilling. Someone is after me. And Shannon kept repeating, they're trying to kill me. The call lasted more than 22 minutes. Shannon was sometimes coherent, sometimes unable to form sentences. At certain moments, you could only hear heavy breathing and banging sounds, as if someone was punching a door or something like that. At other times, she was screaming. The operator asked where she was. Shannon couldn't answer. After the call, Shannon ran out of Brewer's house. And then she started banging on the neighbor's door, actually on the neighbor's doors, and begging for help. A resident named Gus Collette opened the door for her. He let the girl in and called the police. But when he said the police were coming, Shannon became even more desperate. She got up and ran out again into the night. She was last seen knocking on the door of another resident, Barbara Brennan. She was screaming for help. When the police finally arrived, almost an hour after the original call, Shannon Gilbert had disappeared. And here, my dear friends, begins the part that no one expected, okay? The Suffolk County Police launched a search for Shannon. Months went by without finding anything. Then, on December 11, 2010, a police officer named John Malia was there doing some training exercise with his sniffer dog, Blue, on a secluded stretch along Ocean Parkway. It's a road that runs through Gilgo Beach, a remote area full of bushes on the Long Island coast. Out of nowhere, the dog stopped there. He started digging. You know how dogs act when they sense something's there? That's right. And there, wrapped in camouflage burlap, the kind used for duck hunting, I don't know if you've seen it, were the human remains of someone. They weren't Shannon Gilbert's, okay? In case she was the first person you thought of. 2 days later, the investigators returned to the site and found 3 more bodies, scattered there in a stretch of less than a kilometer, along the same road. All wrapped in that burlap, anyway, all of them were young women. The police had gone to look for a missing person and found a cemetery. The 4 women were identified. Melissa Barthelemy, 24 years old. Maureen Breinard Barnes, 25. Megan Waterman, 22, and Amber Lynn Costello, 27 years old. They all worked as escorts, and they advertised the services they offered and provided on Craigslist. They had all disappeared between June 2007 and September 2010. None of them knew or were connected to each other. They weren't friends or anything. They became known as the Gilgo Four. But check this out. In the following months, the search expanded, and what the police found was even worse than they imagined, okay? Between March and April of 2011, 6 more sets of human remains were found along Ocean Parkway, and in nearby areas as well. Some were women whose torsos had been found years earlier in Manorville. And look, that's more than 60 kilometers away. In 2000 and 2003, others were victims who had never been reported missing. In total, 10 sets of human remains were found, among them a woman and her 2-year-old daughter, a little child. There was also a man dressed in women's clothing whose identity was never publicly revealed. It was no longer just about a missing woman, right? It all started with that disappearance I talked about, or rather mentioned to you. So now that was definitely a huge investigation into a possible serial killer. But you must be wondering about Shannon Gilbert, right? In December 2011, 19 months after her disappearance, her remains were also found in a marsh near Oak Beach, less than a kilometer from where she had last been seen. Her cause of death was classified as undetermined. The police said she probably wandered into a marsh there, became disoriented, and drowned. The family disagreed with that. An independent medical examiner hired by the family said that the injuries on Shauna's neck were consistent with strangulation. Not from an alligator or any animal, but from a human being. To this day, Shannon Gilbert's case has not been officially linked to the Gilgo murders, okay? But it was the search for her that unearthed everything we're about to learn. So now, let's go back to those calls that opened this episode. Melissa Barthelemy was 24 years old, as I said. She was from Buffalo in upstate New York. And she had moved to the Bronx, wanting to work there as a hairdresser. When the job at the salon didn't come through, she started working as an escort through the website I mentioned to you, Craigslist, to pay the bills anyway. She did her own thing there, and no one had a problem with it, right? On July 12, 2009, Melissa told a friend that she was going to meet a certain client. She deposited $900 into her account, probably from a previous meeting, and tried to call an ex-boyfriend. He didn't answer. That was the last time anyone heard from her. After Melissa disappeared out of nowhere, her younger sister Amanda, who was 15 at the time, started receiving phone calls. The first call came from Melissa's cell phone. Amanda answered thinking it was her sister, remember? But it was that man. He started saying strange things. The calls came on 7 occasions over several weeks. Each one lasted less than 3 minutes. The man spoke in a monotone voice, without emotion. Amanda described the voice as that of a middle-aged white man with a strong New York and Long Island accent. He called Melissa degrading names, said he had sex with her, said he killed her. In the last call on August 26, 2009, he said the following: "I'm going to watch her body rot." And then he did one last thing. He spoke to Amanda. "Maybe one day I'll go there to show you." The police even tried to trace the calls. They all came from busy places in Manhattan. Penn Station, Times Square, the area around Madison Square. The guy hung up too quickly for an exact location, you know? Like those things we see in movies where the criminal knows exactly he's there with a stopwatch. When, the police are almost tracing the call, the guy hangs up. Exactly. The calls stopped completely after a TV report mentioned the existence of these calls. Probably because the guy got scared, of being identified, being traced, that kind of thing. One thing caught the investigators' attention. One of the calls made the cell phone emit a signal from a specific location, Massapequa, which is a residential neighborhood on Long Island, pretty far from Manhattan, No one knew what that meant at the time. The investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders became the most talked about criminal case on Long Island, though. Books were written, documentaries were made, and theories about the Long Island serial killer dominated true crime forums on the internet, right? But there's always a but, right? The case stalled, it didn't go anywhere, okay? It just stayed there, spinning its wheels, going in circles. One main reason, James Burke, the chief of police of Suffolk County, he prevented the FBI from joining the investigation. He blocked interagency cooperation, handled the case in, let's say, a territorial turf-protecting way that left the victims' families absolutely furious, enraged. They felt like, there was some abandonment there. No, not abandonment, but something kind of hidden, strange, right? And with good reason, because the police weren't taking the case seriously, not the way they wanted, right? Because the victims, as you may have already inferred, were sex workers. And as we've seen many times in criminal cases, these people, as a rule, not always, but most of the time, are the preferred victims of serial killers, right? Precisely because sometimes no one will even notice they're missing. In 2015, Burke, that cop, was arrested, not because of the Gilgo Beach case, okay? But for assaulting a detainee there and then conspiring to prevent the FBI from investigating his own actions. Only after Burke left did the FBI finally get involved in the investigation. I don't know, those messes that don't really make any sense, right? That's just how these things happen, but fortunately they get sorted out in time. Still, progress was slow, okay? More than a decade went by without any arrests. But now I'm going to introduce you to someone. Ready? A guy named Rex Heuermann. Heuermann was a big, imposing guy. He was an architect by profession. He worked in central Manhattan. He designed buildings, renovations, and structures. He lived in Massapequa. I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it, okay? But he lived there, in that place. Massapequa Park, a quiet suburb of Long Island, with his wife, Asa Ellerup. And there's more, okay? 2 children. The neighbors described him as a very quiet, reserved, and extremely intelligent guy. On the outside, Rex Heuermann was just another suburban dad like any other, right? He went unnoticed, despite his stature. On the inside, however, it was a different story, okay? In February 2022, the new Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison did something that should have been done a long time ago, okay? He created a multi-agency task force dedicated solely and exclusively to the Gilgo Beach case. I don't know if it was solely and exclusively, but it was dedicated to the case, okay? FBI, New York State Police, County Sheriff's Department, everyone on the same page. Now we're talking, right? But it's been a while, huh? This thing started way back. Well, anyway, in March 2022, a name appeared for the first time in the official Gilgo Beach investigation. Rex Heuermann. Here, perhaps, is of course one of the main links in this chain, a criminal chain that lasted so long. The investigators had an old lead. Yeah, the missing link, right? A witness who saw the suspect driving a green pickup truck when Emberlyn Costello disappeared back in 2010. Remember the name I mentioned, one of the Gilgo Beach victims? That's right. The task force then cross-checked vehicle records and discovered that a green Chevrolet Avalanche was registered in the name of Heuermann's brother, and that Heuermann was driving this vehicle. And they started pulling on that thread, didn't they? Heuermann's personal cell phone was pinging cell towers at the same locations and times as the burner phones used to contact 3 of the Gilgo 4. Before their disappearance, obviously. Heuermann lived there in Massapequa. The same place where that strange signal came from during the calls to Melissa Barthelomy's cell phone, remember? He worked in downtown Manhattan, exactly the area the sadistic calls came from, let's say, I think we can say with some confidence, right? They were made to Amanda, a 15-year-old girl. Are you connecting all the dots there, guys? There are a lot of things, okay? It's a huge case with a lot like that. I tried to do it the best way possible here so there wouldn't be any loose ends, but also so it wouldn't be, my God, huge. But check this out. Heuermann matched the final description. The suspect's physical appearance that was mentioned there. Do you remember? A white man, middle-aged, monotone voice, Long Island accent. I was even reading here, right? Studying the case. It even reminded me of Trinity. Who remembers Trinity? Comment here for me, from Dexter. But continuing here. Besides all that, right? The description, white man and all, middle-aged, he was a big burly guy. And the victims were all small, thin women. But the investigators still needed something more compelling. And not just these descriptions that could, be the result of, how do you say it, false memories and so on. There's that too. You have to be careful. They needed DNA. And here's where a slice of pizza comes in. Who likes pizza, huh? The task force. Here I'd say it all came down to pizza, but in a good way, okay? The task force set up a surveillance team in Manhattan, okay? They followed Heuermann during his work hours. And on a certain occasion, they saw him leave the office and throw a pizza box into a trash can right there on the sidewalk. Leftover pizza crust that he didn't eat. The police ran to the trash, grabbed the box, and sent it to the lab. The DNA extracted from that pizza crust matched the DNA from a strand of hair found at the bottom of one of those burlap sacks, you know? That were used to wrap Megan Waterman's body, one of the Gilgo 4. Hairs from Heuermann's ex-wife and daughter were also found on some of the victims. Probably transferred from the house where he lived. That thing, the DNA issue, there's a term for it that I can't remember right now, you know? Which is secondary DNA transfer, right? Well, the task force's strategy was clear now, right? They couldn't let Heuermann suspect anything, that he was in their sights until the moment of his arrest. Until the feds arrived at his house at 6 a.m., I'm kidding. The prosecutor, Raymond Tierney, later explained the following. We wanted the only person who mattered, the killer, to think that everything was fine. Everything was normal, that he had no idea. Nobody had any idea it was Trinity. Not Trinity, Heuermann, but just wait and see. On July 13, 2023, they arrested Rex Heuermann near his office in Manhattan. He was then charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4, Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello. The police identified him as the prime suspect in the murder of the 4th woman, Maureen Brainard Barnes. The day after the arrest, Heuermann appeared in court, pleaded not guilty, and cried. The defense attorney, Michael Brown, told the press the following. The only thing he said in tears was, I didn't do it. When the investigators entered Heuermann's house in Massapequa Park, I hope that's how you pronounce it, what they found was disturbing, okay guys? Tens of thousands of pages of material were seized there. In the basement, on one of his computer hard drives, they found a Word document, a file created in the year 2000 and modified over the following years. The internal title of the file was HK 2002-4. Actually, it was 0404 to be more precise. It was in the unallocated space of the disk, the area where data deleted by the user is stored. Yeah, man, do you think investigation is part of IT? Those guys just can't do it, man. Prosecutors called that document the blueprint, a plan, a scheme, because that's exactly what it was. A manual on how to kill, written by an architect. The document had 4 columns, okay? The first one was problems, and the number 1 item on that list was DNA. The second was supplies, including gloves, hairnets, and a police scanner. The third was labeled DS, which according to the prosecutors means dump site. And the fourth was TRG, target. In the target column there, a note said the following, small is good, consistent with the victim's profile, isn't it? All small and thin women, in other words, a sadist, a coward, and kind of dumb, right? But still, they said he was smart, right? But then I was thinking, you know, he listed DNA as one of the problems he might have in covering up all the crimes. Talk about irony, right, guys? Because it was exactly the DNA that brought him down that made him fall, but in a place he had no idea about that he didn't expect, man. On the edge of a pizza. Man, check this out. The document also had pre-preparation sections, okay? Preparation and post-event. The guy was meticulous. In the pre-preparation, there was vehicle inspection, weather forecast, surveillance camera scouting. In the preparation, there was setting up the stage. In the post-event, change the tires, burn the gloves, have a story ready. Burn the stage? That's bizarre, right? Kind of like Dexter, you know? But Trinity wasn't like Dexter, right? Even though Dexter became a fan of Trinity. Not a fan exactly, but kind of obsessed. That was actually what made him go off the rails, right? But anyway, Dexter isn't the topic here. Look, guys, one of the notes from this guy, Heuermann, said the following. Sound travels. A reminder to be concerned about noise. Another thing it said there, consider a blow to the neck next time. In the body preparation session, instructions about removing the head and hands and destroying identifying marks like tattoos. Man, check this out. Details that matched exactly the condition in which some of the victims had been found. Jessica Taylor, for example, was found decapitated, with her arms cut off and a tattoo on her body severely obliterated, by a sharp object there. Prosecutor Tierney said he had never seen anything like it. They also found 2 magazines stored in Heuermann's office there in Manhattan. A 2016 issue of People with the headline "The Hunt for the Long Island Serial Killer" on the cover there, and a 2016 issue of New York Magazine with a cover story about the murders. He followed all the coverage of his own case and kind of took pleasure in it, right? It's pretty obvious. The guy kept the magazines. And there was more, okay? An extensive collection of torture pornography on his devices. Heuermann used the pseudonym Thomas Hawk to communicate with dozens of sex workers and to accumulate this material. The accusations kept piling up, right, as the investigation progressed. In January of 2024, Heuermann was formally charged with the murder of Maureen Brainard Barnes, which is then the 4th one, right? From the original Gilgo 4. In June 2024 then came the charge for the murders of Jessica Taylor, 20 years old, who disappeared in 2003, and Sandra Costilla, 28 years old, whose remains were found in 1993, more than 30 years earlier. In December 2024, the charge for the murder of Valerie Mack, who disappeared in 2008 pattern that repeated itself in all the cases. Heuermann's wife and children were always out of state on the days when each victim disappeared. He waited to be alone at home to act. Man, that's crazy, right? That was most likely the guy's trigger. The fact that he was alone kind of gave him that thought, which I think even has a bit of a sexual undertone behind it, right? I don't know, maybe it's just in my head, right guys? If there's any forensic psychologist watching us, please leave a comment. I'll pin your comment because that's what it seems like, right? The guy finds himself in that situation alone. Oops, now nobody's watching me here. I can do whatever I want. And it kind of gave that feeling, right? Really strange. Well, the guy's defense challenged the DNA evidence, okay? Calling the whole genome tests magic, arguing that the lab wasn't licensed in the state of New York. It's just technical legal jargon to try something, right? But in September 2025, Judge Timothy Mazzei decided that the DNA evidence was indeed admissible. This marked the first time this type of test had been accepted in court. The trial was scheduled for September 2026. But then something else happened. On April 8, 2025, exactly 1,000 days after the arrest, Rex Heuermann, 62 years old, entered the Suffolk County Courthouse in Riverhead. He was there in a dark suit. His hands were cuffed behind him. The courtroom was full, families of victims, police, and press. Then the prosecutor Tierney started confirming the facts with Heuermann, right? Victim by victim. And on or around July 6, 2010, you met Megan Waterman, he asked, right? With the intention of causing her death? And did you cause her death? He pressed the question. Heuermann answered, yes. Did you kill each victim in the same way, that is, by strangulation? He asked. Yes, victim by victim, the same answer. Sandra Costilla, 93, Karen Vergata, 96, Valerie Mack, 2000, Jessica Taylor, 2003. Maureen Barnes, 2007. Melissa Bartellum, 2009, Megan Waterman, 2010, Amber Lynn Costello, 2010. 8 women over 17 years, Heuermann confirmed that he strangled all of them, that he tied the heads and legs of some, that he wrapped the bodies in burlap there, and so on. And that he dumped them in Gilbert, that he dismembered some of the victims. And as he spoke, without any emotion, his ex-wife, Asa Ellerup, and also his daughter, Vittoria, were sitting there in the last row. And they were there, holding each other's hands, squeezing tissues. 1,000 days earlier, he had cried and said he didn't do anything. Now, with the same calmness he used to present an architecture project to a client, he described 8 murders. The defense attorney, Michael Brown, later explained that it got to a point where Rex said, I want to plead guilty. Brown said that Heuermann wanted to spare the victims' families from the suffering of a trial, and to spare his own family as well. Man, the way his mind worked was completely crazy. But remember that I mentioned his behavior? Those calls to Amanda Bartellum weren't about bragging, okay? They weren't meant to challenge the police. They were to make a teenager suffer, like I said. Literally, Heuermann didn't want the spotlight. He wanted control over the situation. And pleading guilty on his own terms at the time he wanted was the last form of control he could exercise. So you were thinking that he somehow had, some compassion, some empathy, that sort of thing. Actually, it was just his egocentrism, his narcissism coming out one last time. Anyway, let's see what happened. But there's one more detail, okay? You know the 8th woman, Karen Vergata? So he admitted to killing her, his 8th victim in this whole scheme, right? As part of a plea deal, okay? Because he still hadn't been formally charged with that murder yet. Karen, she was 34 years old, an escort in Manhattan, and she disappeared in '96, like I said. Her partial remains were found on Fire Island in April of '96. And more remains showed up near Gilgo Beach in 2011. In exchange for this confession, Heuermann won't be prosecuted for Karen's murder, okay? He also agreed to cooperate with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, helping to identify patterns of other serial killers. The sentencing, however, guys, is now set for June 17, 2026, okay? Life in prison without the possibility of parole for sure, right? 3 consecutive life sentences followed by 4 more sentences, 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole. Anyway, it's just a bunch of legal stuff. What it really means when it comes down to it is that the guy's gonna die behind bars, right? After that hearing, Prosecutor Tierney apologized to the victims' families for how long the investigation took. Maureen Barnes' sister Melissa spoke to the press, okay? She said, "For every family that's still searching, still waiting, still holding on, please don't give up. Even when it seems impossible, even when the years go by and the silence feels heavy, keep going. Your loved ones matter. They have not been forgotten." The killer's ex-wife said she never wanted to believe that the man she was married to for 27 years, the father of her daughter, was capable of such an atrocity. And she also said Rex Heuermann, and only Rex Heuermann, is responsible for these crimes. Man, it's amazing how this keeps happening, right? I mean, BTK, right? He also lived there for a long time. They say nobody had any idea, right? But anyway, and to wrap up, guys, do you remember Amanda? Well, I didn't mention it when describing it, but she really nailed it, right? When she described the guy, saying he was a middle-aged white man and all, with a monotone, emotionless voice. It seemed like she was reading the guy's manual. 15 years after that then, in April 2026, Rex Heuermann stood up in a courtroom. There, he described one by one how he killed the 8 women. Exactly like that. Monotone voice, super calm, same tone, no emotion, same way of speaking. As if he were there listing steps. As if he were listing out an architectural plan with mathematical precision. In the end, Amanda was right, wasn't she? She always was. That's it. I really appreciate your company. Don't forget to leave a comment, even if it's just an emoji. It's really important. A kiss from the redhead, and see you in the next episode.